Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
For the record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today is Monday, the 9th day of April 2018. I trust that everyone had an enjoyable weekend. A few scattered showers here and there, and we're hoping that within the next few weeks we'll continue to get more rain because we certainly need it as well. For those families again who had unfortunate circumstances, who lost loved ones over the weekend, want to extend our condolences to you and the extended families as well. It seems as if we're losing more and more persons every day this year so far. Many people have passed away in the Cayman Islands. Again, our condolences go out to those families. You know who you are. I'm hesitant to call names because I don't want to miss out on anyone, but so for all those families who may have lost loved ones, or even those who may have suffered some injury as a result of accidents or whatever over the weekend as well. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. For the Record is a show produced by the staff and the management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor, and you're welcome to join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open, and there is always someone there waiting to take your calls. Normally, it is that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. Of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, then email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at candw.ky. In addition to that, we have a WhatsApp number. That number is 925-3261. I will repeat, 925-3261. We encourage you to send us a text message or leave us a voice note. If you leave a voice note for us, we will play the contents of that voice note during the course of the show as well. So again, you are listening audience. You are the persons who make For the Record the show that it is. So we encourage you to participate. Get involved in the conversation. Tell us what's on your mind. Tell us the concerns that you have. If you have suggestions for various suggestions on various issues, please feel free to share those with us as well. If there are controversial issues, as long as they don't fall into the category where they may be defamatory or questionable in terms of the veracity of it, then we certainly welcome any suggestions that you may have or information that you may have as well. Today's show, we're going to be talking about the Cayman Islands Marine Safety and Coast Guard. And we're going to have officials here with us talking about those issues. Of course, we have just gotten over the Easter holiday season when people go out to camp, or they say camping now. We used to say picnicking, go to picnics. Miss Dollar's picnic used to take place in Sports Beach area and stuff like that. And those days you rode on the back of a truck with those long wooden benches and stuff like that. And you went and you picnicked. Nowadays they call it camping. But that is over. Seems as if it was pretty uneventful in terms of fatalities, loss of life, and that is commendable as well. And I'm sure that that has a lot to do with preparation and instructions given by our safety experts and everything as well. I think we can actually start the conversation and start to talk about that as well. We have in the studio with us Mr. Philip Bostock. He's the commander of Her Majesty's Coast Guard. We also have with us Chief Inspector and Acting Superintendent Mr. Brad Ebanks with the Royal Cayman Islands Police Services Joint Marine Unit. And we will have joining us in the studio soon the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration, Mr. Wesley Howell, as well. So in the meantime, we can talk about the Easter period, the camping, the picnicking, and how that went, the instructions that were given out to people in terms of safety, underwater, preparations of campsites and everything else. Let's talk about that. How did things go?
Sure. Morning, O.C., and morning to the listening public. Thanks for having us with you this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having us around.
Good morning, Mr. Bostock, as well. Okay. Tell us about the Easter season.
Sure, O.C. Yeah, just before Easter this year, as we've done in the previous years, we realized that Easter time, there's an increase of beach activity, water activity. On many occasions, there are boats that have not been out for the entire year, suddenly comes out on Easter. So we do recognize that with this increased activity becomes the increase for things to possibly go wrong also accompanies that. So just before Easter, we went ahead and done a beach and water safety PSA, public service announcement. Just so that's giving the public some reminders of the requirements for their vessels, some other water safety points, and I think that overall it was adhered to, and the public is quickly becoming aware that their personal safety and how things can go wrong. These things can happen. So we want to make sure that all the families, we wanted to make sure that all the families were safe and they're taking all the precautions when it comes to Easter camping, Easter boating, etc. So I think the weekend went pretty eventful.
On a scale of
yes.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate it?
I would probably go as far as 8 or 9.
Okay.
As you know,
because the one fatality that was reported that was more of natural causes than anything else, I believe, right?
Right. Yeah, that's correct. It didn't seem to have anything to do with any safety issues or anything that of that nature.
Okay. For the benefit of our listening and viewing audience, we have now been joined by Mr. Wesley Howell. You know him as the supervisor of elections. That's comes around every 3 years, we would say, but start 1 year in preparation for the elections. But his normal day job is that of Chief Officer in the Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration. Mr. Howell, good morning. Welcome back to For the Record, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Connor. Good morning to your listening audience this morning.
I want to give you an opportunity to introduce our guests who really don't need any introduction and have already been introduced of sorts, but to reintroduce them and let's talk about some of the things, the subjects that we will be talking about this morning as well, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. We have with us Mr. Philip Bostock from Her Majesty's Coast Guard. He's a commander. He was here earlier a few months ago doing some preliminary work for us, some recommendations on how we can improve our marine safety.
Mm-hmm.
He is now back for a 12-month secondment to put those plans into action and to help us get our National Coast Guard off the ground. He's also sort of paving the way, or we are collectively paving the way for Coast Guard and marine safety throughout the overseas territories. So some of the time that he has here, he's also helping to develop capabilities throughout the OTs in the region as well. And then no stranger to the radio or to the public, we have Superintendent Brady Banks, who has oversight for the Joint Marine Unit. For those that don't know, this Joint Marine Unit is operated by the RCIPS, but it also has members from Customs Department, and it should be from the Immigration Department as well. And those officers then make up the Joint Marine Unit, who patrol our waters proactively, and also for search and rescue and marine safety as well.
Okay.
So we're happy to be here.
Okay. And in the introduction, Acting Superintendent Ebanks started to explain, some of the preparations that were made for the Easter season. Now, we find that Easter season, there's probably more boating activity than any other time of the year. Yes, we do have fishing tournaments where you have increased activity as well. And we're finding that more and more persons now are becoming involved in boating or beach activities as well. We Caymanians say, we take it for granted, so we hardly go to the beach, but we see more and more persons who are resident in the islands taking advantage of it, especially if they come from those countries where you have severe winters and everything else. So the whole preparation becomes much more challenging in terms of the frequency with which things now occur in the Cayman Islands.
Absolutely. I say tongue-in-cheek that my boys, true Caymanian boys they are, don't swim between November and March because the water's too cold. So now that we're getting into April, May, June, they'll start to go to the beach more often. And from a local perspective, I think our take-up will be, but from a tourism area, we have had record numbers of tourists on our shores. They're exploring lots of beaches. We have magazines now that are recommending, beaches like Spots Beach as one of the top 10 beaches to go to, which would have been sort of off the beaten track for most tourists. Yes. So now we see lots of cars up there on the weekend, lots of people going through, even during the weekdays, which brings us to another part of the conversation that we want to have is, one thing is when you have folks out at sea, and what we're actually promoting is that they will properly equip their vessels before they go out. So life vest, flares, water, those sorts of things. But when it comes to swimming, we are exploring with DOT and some of the other partners the possibility of having lifeguards in some of the more popular areas, some of those that are more remote, to be able to have first responders within the first few minutes to be on scene. The other bit that we are working on, and Phil is taking the lead on this, is proper signage warning persons about currents. Spots Beach again, for example. So those of us, I heard you on the way in talking about picnicking at Spots Beach, but for those of us who know Spots Beach, there are areas that we don't go into because we know the current's going to be really strong there. So you can go from standing up with no problem, or just swimming without any issues, to 10 feet over you, then have a current that's sweeping you out to sea. So to be able to put up signage to speak about that, to give warnings, and to have those easily read by persons who don't speak English, for example, as their first language, and to have sort of one signage covering a range of messaging, including where you're allowed to fish and not fish and those sorts of things.
Okay, folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. In the studio, I have with me Mr. Wesley Howell, who's the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration, Mr. Philip Bostock, who's a Commander in Her Majesty's Coast Guard, and we have Acting Superintendent Mr. Brad Ebanks, who's with the Royal Cayman Islands Police Services Joint Marine Unit. We're going to take a commercial break. When we return, the conversation will continue with these three gentlemen. Please stay tuned. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, we have Mr. Wesley Howell, the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration, Mr. Philip Bostock, I should call him Commander Philip Bostock, with Her Majesty's Coast Guard, and Acting Superintendent Mr. Brad Ebanks with the Royal Cayman Islands Police Services Joint Marine Unit. We're talking about Cayman Islands maritime safety as well as the Coast Guard. We want to talk about, continue the conversation about beach swimmers and snorkelers. We want to talk about signage in including no swim warnings, lifeguards for high volume areas as well. Let's talk about the issue of lifeguards, something that we don't see a whole lot of in the Cayman Islands, even I believe at private places like hotels around the beach area and stuff like that. We have been pretty fortunate in terms of very little loss of life in that area. We see more of an an increase in snorkeling incidents, but not so much from locals as opposed to visitors. Let's talk about those two issues, the snorkelers as well as the lifeguards and the presence of lifeguards.
So, I mean, the one place that stands out for me in terms of lifeguards is the Cayman Turtle Center. Yes. They have trained lifeguards on duty there. You have the water slide and the waterfall and lots of folks in and out of the pool, so they do a really good job of keeping people safe and keeping the unruly kids in check. Mm-hmm. But from a tourist density perspective, the 7 Mile Beach area, we see some opportunities there between government and the private sector in terms of so many of the larger developments have lots of guests mm-hmm. that use beaches in and around their establishments. So we're looking at the possibility of rolling out several lifeguard stations along that stretch to be able to have quick response in the event that something happens with somebody trained in CPR first aid, hopefully with something like an AED machine as well. Going back, sort of looking at some of the profiles of those who get themselves in difficulty. It's not always a swimming issue. Sometimes it's a cardiac issue mm-hmm. when the bodies are being stressed a little bit more than they're used to, but being in the water. So to be able to respond with an AED would be tremendously helpful as well. And then some of the other more sort of remote areas, if we're looking at again Spots Beach, some of the areas up in East End North Side that folks are using for recreational swimming and picnicking. We can't be everywhere at all times, so we'd have to go through some sort of risk profiling to figure out where we get the best coverage for the funding. But I can say that the joint operations between the fire service in terms of inflatable rescue vehicles and what we call wave runners or jet ski, the personal watercraft, they are now gearing up to start launching their rescue, sea rescue services in conjunction with the police and 911. So we're looking forward to that because we have then the fire station in West Bay, one in Georgetown and one in Frank Sound. So from a force multiplier perspective, in terms of the JMU, which is more centrally located, to be able to have fast response from the fire service, that'd be great. And we also heard a few months back about the firemen and women running across the street from West Bay Fire Station into Cemetery Beach and effecting a rescue on shore, right offshore there as well. So we see that as again, another positive improvement in terms of our ability to keep those who swim in our waters safe.
So in the situation with lifeguards, that's likely to be a collaborative effort between government and the private sector?
Absolutely. I mean, we would approach the private sector in that because I think it's a win-win. We both benefit from the tourism industry, and it's in our best interest to project the most safe means of enjoying our waters and our water sports. So that would be something that we're working with, towards.
Mm-hmm. And in that area, what opportunities are we looking for, let's say, for Caymanians who would have an interest in that? And maybe I can go to Commander Bostock with this in terms of the UK and lifeguards. How can one go about preparing for, such a role?
Lifeguard training in the UK is done mainly by one of our big charities, the Royal National Lifeboat Institute, which is a very unique setup, I think, in the world, insofar as all our lifeboats and lifeguards that we use in the UK are actually volunteers rather than paid professionals. However, they provide a lot of training opportunities and also provide overseas training, so that's certainly someone we could engage in providing training to possible lifeguards here to do that, and also to assist with things like risk assessment and other things to do that. We've already utilized lots of their methods and some of the contacts in the UK for conducting a risk assessment at Spots Beach. And what we've done is working with the Department of Tourism, Department of Environment, Fisheries, the police, other stakeholders a couple of weeks back, and we had a meeting and just discussed the risks at the beach and what you mentioned so pointedly is the risk for visitors that do not know the area, maybe not speak English as their first language or don't speak English at all. And for myself coming here, it's beautiful coastlines, beautiful beaches, the water's nice and warm, at least for us visitors, and the dangers are not visible. But in the UK, for example, or in Europe, the beaches are normally not so hospitable 9 to 10 months of the year, and the water's cold and murky, so it's a very different setup. So to look at these risks, and we've actually done a risk assessment at Spots Beach, the pilot project, to take around to other beaches as well in the next couple of months. And we've been there, again, all the stakeholders met for a risk assessment. We looked at all the risks at Spot Beach, be that the currents, be that the number of people that use it during different times of the week, be that the signage that's there at the moment, and other hazards like rocks in the water and other things that might injure or hurt people. One of the measures that comes from that is that we're looking at a no-swim zone, for example, the part that you mentioned when you come to the beach to the right, where there's strong currents, to make that visible with some buoys in the water, some markers, and some very clear signs saying do not swim beyond this point because it might be dangerous, to stop accidents happening in the first place. So there's a lot of work going on there, and lifeguards, as Mr. Howell said, is one of the pieces of the puzzle to look at as well and see when would be the best use of a lifeguard there, because obviously, again, as I said, we can't have lifeguards at all beaches at all times because it has to be paid for somehow as well. So, unfortunately.
We still have a few minutes before we go to our 8 o'clock news. The Department of Environment, do they factor into this equation as well? We know that they're out there, they're normally monitoring, as well, but when it comes to response, they could be available as well.
They actually are available. The DOE sort of play a proactive role in North Sound, also in terms of the wildlife interaction, but also from a sea state perspective, they share that with the Joint Marine Unit, where they'll actually issue a North Sound close to water sports operators if the seas become unsafe for them to operate their boats out there. But in terms of rescue operations, I know Superintendent Brady Banks has a list of operators who they have verbal agreements with in relation to sending their assets and staff out to effect search and rescue, to provide tugboat services, marine firefighting services, and a range of other areas there. But DOE, Customs, Port Authority, all play a role in terms of government assets with boats that are able to offer assistance and do so.
Okay, one of our listeners, and I think I have enough time to read this. It said, good morning, OC, to you and your panel. I just heard the Chief Officer mention Spots Beach, which is a very popular beach. I am wondering when is the government going to install permanent restroom facilities there? Because it is a disgrace of what they have there now, based on the volume of people who attend that area as well. So we can formulate a response for that when we return from the news, which will begin now. Please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back immediately after the 8 o'clock news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Chief Officer Mr. Wesley Howell. He's the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration. We have Commander Philip Bostock with Her Majesty's Coast Guard, and we have Acting Superintendent Mr. Brad Ebanks, who's with the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service Joint Marine Unit. We're discussing Cayman Islands maritime safety and Coast Guard issues. We're going to talk about search and rescue capability improvements at this point in time. I just want to remind our listening audience that our phone lines are open. We encourage you to call early. Don't wait until 9:25 or 9:20 to call in, and then you'll have 10 minutes to squeeze everything in. So this is your opportunity to call in, because we have much more flexibility in terms of time. But I'm going to pass the mic over to Superintendent Brad Ebanks now to talk about some training initiatives that have been taking place as well, sir.
Thanks, OC. Mr. Howell alluded to the fire department being trained to assist us with search and rescue. From July 2017, we have put on a set of 6 training courses with the fire department. Overall, we've undertaken to train 30 officers. 26 of those have actually passed. What we've done is we have selected 5 of those that were really, really good in the area, and we have done an advanced training with them. The training consists of basic boat handling skills, survival at sea, rescue techniques, both from personal watercraft and their RIB. Incident command, that is to help prepare them to take command and control of a search and rescue until it can officially be taken up by maybe the Marine unit or otherwise. So they have some level of control over the situation. Normally we see where 1 or 2 persons maybe run into difficulties, but there is a possibility that you may have, say, a boat in the North Sound with, multiple passengers on board. And we got to be able to coordinate that properly, where we call other vessels to come in to assist. But what is key about the fire service getting involved in this search and rescue scheme is that they are located in various strategic locations, West Bay, Georgetown, and Frank Sound. The Marine unit being a more central location, the response time to the West Bay area, for instance, and even up into the eastern districts will take some time. So the West Bay Fire Service, there's a RIB that's going to be stationed there. Officers from that station is trained. They also have 3 personal watercraft, which will, with the life saving, there's a platform that is towed behind the personal watercraft that actually people can be rescued and put on. Mm-hmm. So all these things are in place, but we got to make sure that, it's not in its final stages. They have to be signed off and properly regulated, because what we don't want is sending first responders out there and they themselves get into difficulty, because it's, you have the person who is being rescued, and then if the responders are not properly ready, then they can possibly get into difficulties as well. And one of the things that we see is that when the weather is calm, usually nothing happens. But when it's inclement weather is when these things happen. So we're going to make sure that who we send out there is properly trained and properly equipped to do the job. So it's not online right now, but it certainly is coming online in the very near future.
Okay. Now, Mr. Howell, I know that you have some talking points prepared, and I really don't want to divert from too much from that, because there are certain things that you really, really want to cover and want the people to know about. The issue that was raised by one of our listeners in relation to the bathroom facilities and stuff like that, we can touch on that as well, simply because they raised it. It's not something that we, were prepared to talk about here. But during the commercial break, we were talking about Smith's Barcadere. I still call it Smith's Barcadere instead of Smith's Cove. And there are bathroom facilities there, shower facilities as well.
Yes, sir.
And Smith's Barcadere was one of the more popular locations. I think because of the shifting demographics, we're now seeing the Spots Beach area becoming much more popular. You look on weekdays and weekends, and the parking lot there is always filled with vehicles and everything else. So we see the shifting demographics causing Spots Beach area to become much more popular now. So when we compare Smith's Barcadere to Spots Beach, we see more in terms of facilities for Smith's Barcadere, but not for Spots Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Conan. Your listener raised an important point. The size, the sheer size, the beach frontage of Spots Beach exceeds that of Smith's Barcadere, and the numbers of beachgoers there is quite high. So definitely that's a recommendation that we'll make to our partners over at DOT and collectively with the Port Authority. The other thing that we're looking at, and Superintendent Bradley Banks has brought this one up, is the possibility of adding a small boat launch facility at the Spots Dock, which is just up the street from that. Otherwise, if we're going to effect any sort of rescue by sea in that area, the vessels would have to be launched in South Sound and then make their way back up. So being able to launch off the Spots Dock area would then allow for much faster response in that area as well, all the way up to Pedro, St. James even. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to shoot over to Commander Bostock, and just this one is off the talking point in relation to when you compare the Cayman Islands to other jurisdictions. What are some of the challenges that you see us facing here in terms of establishing a Coast Guard unit, establishing safety procedures? We see, for instance, everyone wants government's assistance, wants government to do this, wants government to do that. But at the same time, when government introduces measures that will help to secure a person's safety, like, say, for instance, boat registration and things of that nature, you get a pushback from the public. Government is getting too involved, in what we're doing, but at the same time, they're looking for government to assist. What are some of the challenges that we're facing?
It's a common problem, I have to say, and it's not different here from the UK. Whenever we make new regulations and new laws, there's naturally pushback because people are worried about, firstly, costs or the inconvenience, and it's the same about all sectors when safety comes into play. Just remember the introduction of seatbelts in cars about 40 years back or so, and how long that took to implement. A lot of things we trying to do is to convince people to do the right things, and a lot of safety is common sense, and prepare yourself for any situation that you might encounter when you go out in a boat that might be out of your control, be that the weather, be that an accident, be that a medical emergency, and so on. So we recommend that people take the time to prepare themselves, think about how many people they're going to have on the boat, what the weather's going to be like, check the weather reports, get the correct safety equipment, so have life vests for everyone, and preferably wear them whenever you can when you're on the boat, because you never know when an accident might happen or you might slip and fall into the water, especially if you're alone. Means of alerting people, be that a flare you have on board, a mobile phone, a radio, preferably marine radio. You can raise the alert. Also let people at home know that you're going somewhere when you're supposed to be back, so that when something goes wrong, there's people at the shore side who can raise the alert on your behalf. A lot of very easy things you can do to make your journey, to make your trip safer on the boat. So it's much more about educating why it's important rather than hitting people with the law and slapping on penalties if you don't have a life jacket.
Excellent point. Excellent point. We have 2 callers. I think we can accommodate one before we take our commercial break. First caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Chief Officer. Good morning, Mr. C. Good morning, Commandant. Good morning, Superintendent.
Good morning, sir.
Okay. My concern here, and let me say this first. Thank you for bringing forth this Coast Guard. What I want to know is what, in terms of recruitment, what is a prerequisite to hire these, to hire or recruit Coast Guard officers? What is the prerequisite for that, sir?
Okay. That's a call. Okay.
So I'll take that one. We're a bit early on in terms of staffing, but what we have already sort of gotten agreement on is that we would do direct entry into the Coast Guard, as opposed to taking officers from either customs or immigration or police who are already law enforcement officers. We would then train them up on maritime safety, lifeguard, Coast Guard, drug and addiction, search and rescue, and then promotions then would happen within the ranks of the Coast Guard, as opposed to having officers rotated in and out of there. We know that the Coast Guard system, a formal Coast Guard, is new to Cayman, so we are looking at supplementing the training of Caymanians with folks coming in as advisors to make that happen. But it's our goal to have it head up by a Caymanian commandant reporting into the police commissioner. But for that to be, a standalone department unto itself. So I'm not sure if I answered your question in completeness, but that is our view at this point, and that's what we're working towards in terms of our plans.
Okay. Ms. Susan, can we take the other caller before the break? Let's take the other caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hi, good morning, O.T.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes, I noticed that the chief officer.
Yeah, if you're on your speakerphone, we're getting an echo on the side, caller.
I noticed that the chief officer said that it may not be a standalone department. Hello?
Yes, ma'am. We're hearing you. Go right ahead now.
Yes, it may not be a standalone apartment. I have some issues with that, but I would like to hear a little more about the whole terms of reference of the Coast Guard and how it will benefit our young people, and if it will be another way of us helping our young people to be more in nation building, et cetera, et cetera. So I wonder when Mr. Howell will take it out to the people and discuss it, and what is the Coast Guard. I am quite familiar with the Coast Guard coming here from Jamaica and how the Jamaican Coast Guard worked and the Bermuda Coast Guard worked. I'm quite familiar with that, and I'm also quite familiar in many years ago how our people, young people, went to Trinidad and all those other places. So I'm quite concerned that it may not be on its own and on its own volition, that it may be tied to the police. I don't have anything against the police. I just thought that it should be on its own merit, a department or connected to the Home Office in some respect. So I'd like someone to give me some information, or I'll wait until they're going to do it nationally and talk to the people about the Coast Guard in itself and the process through which we are going to recruit our young people, boys, women, and men. Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. We're going to take a commercial break. When we return, we will have our guests here, our experts, answer your questions and address the concerns that both callers have raised as well. Please stay tuned. For the Record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me, Chief Officer Mr. Wesley Howell, Commander Mr. Philip Bostock, and Acting Superintendent Mr. Brad Ebanks. We're talking about Cayman Islands Maritime Safety and the Coast Guard. We have one caller who has rejoined us because I think he hadn't completed what he wanted to say. Caller, good morning. Welcome back to For the Record.
Yes, sorry about that, O.C. Good morning again. That lady that called right after me took away exactly what I wanted to ask. I think Superintendent mentioned he recruited 30 officers or recipients, and I think you said 26 already started past the test. Now, where are these guys from? I mean, where are these recipients from? Like the lady said, I thought you were going to try to get all of the youth, or most of the youth that's out there kicking around, they first offend to the court, try to recruit those guys and get them to train in the Coast Guard. That was my outlook on it, and that's what I would like to see. These guys already have a job. I think you're talking about training firemen, policemen. That's not right. In my opinion, it's not right. You need to recruit new officers, and like the lady said, it has to be a standalone department, not like several portfolios we have of ministry we have here, where it doesn't stand alone. You go to one ministry, and he's saying, "Oh, it's not my problem; it's the next guy's problem." And I look and see. I think that what will happen here. The Coast Guard will be blaming the police will be blaming the firemen. No, let's we have this thing on a standalone issue, on a standalone department, where it can function and operate like a real Coast Guard. And I'd really like to see our recruitment extend to the new men and women in this country. That's why I asked what's the prerequisite. If they can't come up with the requirement to join it, but let's get them to go back to school and do their GED classes and get them prepared to join this Coast Guard. Thank you. That's all I have to say right now. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you very much again, caller. We have one more caller, but I want to give our guests here an opportunity to respond to those two calls that we received earlier as well. Superintendent?
Yeah, thanks, O.C. Caller, I do apologize if you misunderstood what I had said relative to the 26 officers that was trained. What I did say was that those 26 officers are actually from the fire service, and in efforts to try to broaden our response capability for search and rescue, we've trained those officers, those 26 officers, to actually assist us in the time of an emergency. So it's not that we went out and recruited 26 officers into the Marine unit as yet, but those numbers are just what are trained in search and rescue to assist us. So I do apologize if there was some misunderstanding there. But I will say that my preference would be, when we're recruiting, to recruit young Caymanians, majority of them, that would give some longevity to serving the Coast Guard. What we do realize, or what we did realize in this training with the fire service, my two training officers were astounded by the ability for these young officers in the fire service, how quickly they caught on to navigation, boat handling skills. So it just goes to show that we still have a lot of seafaring capability in our young people's
Blood
genes.
still flowing through the veins.
It's still there. So we certainly want to capitalize on that and get our young people in. Now, as in any major operation like this, you will need experienced people who come in and set the foundation and show the young people how it's done. I mean, a Coast Guard is new to us, so that is important as well. But we're looking for Caymanians, young Caymanians, majority of it, to be in the Coast Guard.
We still have two callers, but I want to give Mr. Howell an opportunity to add to that as well.
One quick observation as well for the listening public. We actually have essentially two programs running at the same time. So we have Commander Bostock working on our search and rescue capability as it exists now, beefing that up wherever we can based on the recommendations come out of the last report. In addition to that, we're also working towards forming the Coast Guard. So when the caller heard about the 26 officers, that's for our current search and rescue capability. As we go forward over the next year or two, and we start to ramp up the Coast Guard in terms of assets and personnel, then those other areas will start to kick in. So just to make it clear for folks that we have, two programs going on essentially at the same time.
Okay, and I just want to alert our listening and viewing audience as well that at some point in time during the course of this show, I will read the Premier's statement of the 14th of March of this year to the Legislative Assembly, talking about crime fighting initiatives that will be taking place, and where he speaks about the creation of Cayman Islands Coast Guard as well. But let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning to all of you there. What I'm hearing is music to my ears. It's good. Mr. O.C., you mentioned something about people not calling on government for everything, and I couldn't agree with you more. Because the more people get involved in helping in community issues and events and emergencies, the more you build community. And I've discussed this with Mr. Brad in the past. When you go back in history, before government got their first robalo many years ago, when there was word came out that somebody was missing, within a short order, you had 10, 15 boats out looking and on the water. When the government got their boat, they informed the rest of the people that would help, we don't need your help no more, we have our own boat. And unfortunately, that attitude has pervaded until now. I believe that there's now going to be a change in that, and that they will now in the future be calling on private people that they know that have the equipment, that have the skills, that have the necessary navigation equipment and all the rest of it. Because in times of emergency on the water, if the phrase time is of the essence ever applied, it applies to an emergency on the water. And I'm hoping that, Mr. Brad, that your dream of having a civilian group of people involved in all the different districts with all the different size boats, from the big ones to the 14-foot aluminum to the wave runners, to assist depending on what the issue is. That can really be developed this time and doesn't fall on deaf ears in the upper areas of government. And it would also, if that comes to fruition, create a much safer boating community, because people would be trained on the proper safety procedures, have all the right equipment on their boat. As I mentioned a while ago, Mr. Brad talking about having enough life preservers and flares and all these various things. And so I encourage them, and I wait for the good news when things start to happen along that line and start to involve people. Mm-hmm. And I would just add one more quick thing. We had a one-man Marine section here for many, many years who still has a lot in him that he can give. I know that he's offered his services to the police and to other people involved in the emergency services, but up until now, the last time I checked with him, he's never had a response of people taking him up on the offer to assist in these areas, to do training, to do whatever might be necessary, and that's
Mr. Ladner
Watler.
Yes.
The Marines are. He, for so many years, it was not search and rescue, was not his remit. It was Marine enforcement. But all hours of the night, 24 hours a day, he ran a one person to go wherever was necessary in the darkness of night and the bad weather and everything else, to go and rescue countless numbers of people.
Okay. Caller?
So use those skills. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Thank you very much, caller, for that.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to leave us there on that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you,
Okay,
caller.
Mr.
Let's grab the other caller before our commercial break. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Connor and Mr. Howell and Mr. Brad. How are you all doing today?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Fine. Good to hear your voice again. Haven't heard from you in a long time.
Good morning,
Yeah,
sir.
well, you gotta keep quiet a little bit, you know, and I had a what they call Libert Stragi, I went down to the islands, for a little while. But
Okay.
anyhow, yeah, glad to hear you all back too, because I was listening to you sometime down there as well, down in the Bay Islands,
Okay, that's good.
and pick you up down the Clearmine, especially in this little island for Utila. But anyhow, when you're talking about life saving and Coast Guard, I agree 150% with the last caller, Mr. Ladner Watler. They need to use his expertise again. He knows the water. He grew up in the water. Like all of us, as you all know, you're all Caymanians. Even Mr. Howell is Caymanian. We know that the Caymanians are very, very qualified in swimming and diving and what have you. I agree that you need to upgrade the scale when it comes to the skills with the Coast Guard and what have you. But we got good people, Caymanians, which I'm hoping that this job is not for somebody from Australia or New Zealand or somewhere about, but this job is specifically to Caymanians. I myself have a bronze medallion for life saving. I don't know how much people on the island that has that, because that is one of the highest ones in which I obtained that in Barbados. But I have a bronze medallion for life saving, and the course that we had to do was very intense, and you had to be qualified to receive that. And I really hope that this job, Mr. Howell and Mr. Brad, is for Caymanians and Caymanians only, and that we don't have any foreigners coming here taking a job to tell us about the waters in the Cayman Islands, because down in West Bay, they got good swimmers, good divers, and also in general on the island, we got good boatmen. So I hope that this job will be for Caymanians only. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. With that, we're going to take a commercial break. Again, when we return, we will have our guests in the studio here respond to all of the comments, questions that were posed to them as well. Please stay tuned. For the Record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. It is a pleasure to have in the studio with us this morning Chief Officer in the Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration, Mr. Wesley Howell, Commander Mr. Philip Bostock with Her Majesty's Coast Guard, and Acting Superintendent Mr. Brad Banks with the Royal Cayman Islands Police Joint Marine Unit. To put everything in perspective, our Premier, the Honourable Alden McLaughlin, made a statement on the 14th of March of this year in the Legislative Assembly, and it had to do with crime-fighting initiatives. And I will read directly from his statement that was made. He said, another key element in border protection is our commitment to create a modern Cayman Islands Coast Guard with a multifaceted role, including search and rescue, patrolling our seas, and helping keep illegal guns, people, and drugs from being smuggled into our islands. The Coast Guard will have the ability to board and search vessels in our waters and make arrests if needed. We have obtained the services of Mr. Phil Bostock, who is a commander in the UK's Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, who has also been on the ground from January to assist in the development of the Coast Guard. Neither the Coast Guard nor the Border Protection agents can be everywhere, so we will utilize technology to assist in the detection of boats entering our waters. It will be important, Mr. Speaker, and I will ensure that the Coast Guard will be as independent as possible with a local commander who we are hoping will be a Caymanian. It will be properly resourced, and we will ensure that it will be structured in such a way so as not to have its resources poached for other law enforcement work. Staff has already begun specialist joint operations and are undergoing training in enhanced search and rescue capabilities. We have the services of the consultant to the end of this year, and we intend to put in place operational policies as well as any necessary legislation by year end. Major assets will be budgeted for in the 2020 budget cycle. This is a major undertaking, but we are moving as swiftly as we can, and with God's grace, this too will be achieved. So that sets the foundation for everything, Mr. Howell.
Yes, sir. Which is why I needed my weekend on the Brack last weekend, just to be able to recharge the batteries, because it's a lot. There's a lot going on. But it is a love of country why we're doing these efforts. We're thankful to have Mr. Bostock here. Yes. I think we have commitment all around that. Our goal is to hire a Caymanian commandant for the Coast Guard, and because the Coast Guard in itself is new, not that the marine environment is new to us, to have an attachment, an advisor, as we get up to speed and get that entire department built out. Mm-hmm. to answer the earlier caller's question around where the independence-ness of the Coast Guard, early in our discussion when we started to map out the different roles that the Coast Guard could take on, and around the world, Coast Guards are not all the same. Some do offshore, some do close shore, some do helicopter. We looked at where the Coast Guard would leave off and where the police marine assets would take on, and we end up having a bigger overlap with those two than any of the other areas. So after much discussion, including with the Governor's office and the Premier's office, the end result is a budget that's going to be set aside and ring fence completely for the Coast Guard and the marine assets. The reporting chain is that the commander for the Coast Guard will report to the police commissioner, but will have operational oversight of the Coast Guard and the day-to-day running of the Coast Guard. So it's a bit of a hybrid approach. The Premier spoke in his speech around ensuring that the funding and resourcing remain with the Coast Guard, and that is our goal, to ensure that the staffing, the money for fuel and equipment and servicing and all those things are properly budgeted for, and then also ring fence in terms that that's what they're being used for.
So while reporting to the police commissioner, the police commissioner would not be able to touch those funds that are earmarked for the Coast Guard. Absolutely. To use for police.
Or the resources.
Services.
Absolutely.
Or the resources.
Or the resources.
Okay. We have one more caller. Phone lines are busy this morning, which is good. It means people are interested in this topic. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. For the Record.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
And good morning
Trust
to you again.
Good morning, sir.
Steve McNeil here. Well, at least my time on your show had some value.
Yes, certainly did. Certainly.
The government didn't want me to come on to the show when they're on, but at least they have accepted a lot of my recommendations and the things that I have been fighting for many, many years. And I want to congratulate them for doing that. Perhaps if they want new things, then they will have to pay me now for new ideas and tips that you free from Radio Cayman. The second thing I want to talk about is that one of your guests said that he was surprised how quickly those firemen and those young men caught on to navigation and stuff. Well, he must forgot to remember. He must forgot to remember that is our heritage. That is where we came from.
He did say that it flows through our veins. You know that.
Yeah, and I have experience with that because I've seen men who got shoes for the first time to leave this island, wore shoes for the first time, and wore a suit for the first time. I had never seen an engine before, or a ship deck, or a ship deck, or a ship wheel, and went on. And within 2 and 3 years, after not having any high school education, just primary school education, some not even that, could navigate ships and were chief engineers of ships. Then the largest ships that float on the ocean and carry them from place to place. So it doesn't surprise me that that we still possess the skill. It's just that people don't recognize it and think we're fools and think that somebody from Europe or like the caller said from Australia or New Zealand knows better than we do. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that they master that. They could master that in a few months. And so the only thing that I fear though, that as soon as you get something that's localized, it will be Europeanized by other people coming in and says, I know how to do it, and these people are fools and they have no skill and so forth. And I support Miss Lucy Seymour when she called about it being localized, and I too am waiting to see how it goes, because I have a lot to say about it, because I was one of the first people, and I've been consistently saying that we need to have border controls and that we need to take it from the police and that we need to have a Coast Guard to do so. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Steve Macfield, for that as well. Which I'll interject this other point into it: public consultation in this area. How much have we had? How much do we expect to have?
So we'll see. So far, the consultation has been with stakeholders within the government context and a little bit lesser so private operators of commercial vessels. But we're starting our public consultation now last week, this week through the radio show program, and then also then further into town hall meetings and the like. We want to ensure that we get a good feel for what individuals want the Coast Guard to look like. When we were on Wednesday last, we had an invitation to engage the Seafarers Association and speak to some of our experienced seamen. So that's something that we'll schedule on as well. But it is at this point that we're in the middle of our collection as to what it would look like, what it'll take to operate. So the more input we get, the more effective we can be.
Okay, we have one more caller. I think we can accommodate that caller before headline news at 9 o'clock. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning. My name is Peter Hughes, and I'm the training manager at the Red Cross.
Good morning, sir.
Hi. Good morning to Commander Bostock and to Mr. Howell.
Good morning.
I have just...
And Brady Banks, sorry, Superintendent Brady Banks is here as well.
Oh, Mr. Ebanks as well. Okay, thank you. They may... Mr. Ebanks and Mr. Howell both know me as the Health and Safety Training Officer for the Red Cross, and we currently do deliver basic water rescue trainings and also lifeguard trainings under the American Red Cross syllabus here on the island. And my concern, although you're looking at the wider roles of the Coast Guard, is to ensure that we cover our own shores, our own shorelines. And Commander Bostock will tell you that one of the ways the RNLI in the UK formed was to use local resources, use local fishermen, local boat captains who have local knowledge of the waters. So I don't think there would be any question about using local people for that, at that level. In terms of in terms of creating this organisation, I don't think we can ignore the fact that we don't have the in-house resources to do that. We need to employ external influences like Commander Bostock's MCA and Coast Guard, which is what I understand that you're doing now, which is brilliant. But I just wanted to reassure the panel that, at the time when you're looking to train lifeguards, when you're looking to train people that are responsible for water safety on our coastline, then the Red Cross here is already positioned to provide that training.
Thank you very much for that. Comments, Commander?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much for those very valid comments you raised. As you said correctly, in the UK, Coast Guarding and search and rescue is a partnership, which is very important because there's never going to be a single organisation that will be able to provide the full coverage at all times that you need everywhere and have all the knowledge in one place. And exactly that's what we're trying to achieve here as well. While we have a Coast Guard who will have that statutory responsibility as a government body to provide services, there will still be, as we already do, cooperation with the fire service, There will be cooperation with commercial operators, and there will be opportunities to work with the wider public and other boat owners. It's on our list. We're working slowly through all these things. It was one of the recommendations made in the report in 2016, and we'll do the wider public engagement over the next couple of weeks and months and get those conversations going and see how we can best provide a comprehensive service using all the resources available. Another comment I would like to make is about getting local people involved and getting recruitment for local people. Again, one of the aims we have with the Coast Guard is to create career opportunities and progression within the Coast Guard so that young people who join actually have a career perspective and can advance, upskill and do different things and not are just limited to one job in there. And there's actually a future rather than just doing a job for a couple of years and then doing something else. So it's very important to get those skill sets.
Excellent, excellent. How vital is the police helicopter that we have now? How vital a role will that play? And at the same time, I'm going to start to lobby, for you for another helicopter as well, because I believe that we, based on the success that we have achieved with the use of the helicopter that we have, having another one in service. And if Uncle Dart is listening, we know that he has his own personal helicopter. But if he wanted to make a donation, I'm sure that the Cayman Islands government would be, no strings attached, would be receptive to the donation of an additional helicopter for the Cayman Islands as well. Okay, we're going to our headline news. Only come back, maybe we can answer that, or maybe we'll get a call from the DART Corporation as well, offering a helicopter. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Chief Officer Mr. Wesley Howell, Commander Mr. Philip Bostock, and Superintendent Mr. Brad Ebanks of the Royal Cayman Islands Police Services Joint Marine Unit. I'm going to have a little light moment before I throw the mic back over to them, but my statement before wasn't really a light moment in terms of, getting a contribution from the DART Corporation in terms of a helicopter. But one of our callers, Dr. Steve McFeel, I'm sure realizing that we have limited time, didn't give the joke about himself in terms of navigation. And of course, his grandfather, Mr. Lemuel McFeel, we used to call him Mr. Lemmy, was a real seaman himself, did a lot of fishing and stuff like that in the North Sound. And Captain Thomas Dias, he used to teach navigation. So Dr. McField's story is that his grandfather, Mr. Lemmy, sent him to Captain Tom for him to teach navigation. Had a school teaching him navigation. So Mr. Lemmy bumped into Captain Tom, and Mr. Lemmy said, Captain Tom, how's my grandson doing? How's my grandson doing in navigation? Captain Tom said, I don't know about him. I don't know about his future. I gave him a course to plot. He was supposed to plot a course to go from Cayman to either Montego Bay or Negril, somewhere in Jamaica, and the course that he ended up plotting took him somewhere to Germany. So I'm not too sure about his his future in navigation. So that's a light moment there. Of course, I can't tell a joke as good as Dr. Steve McFeel can, with it, but
until he's a lawyer, so.
As well. But let's talk about the helicopter for a minute, if we may.
Mr. Connor, the helicopter is a definite asset. We've seen most recently where we deployed the helicopter to Turks and Caicos Islands to help them with a issue they had with a overrun of migrants, illegal migrants coming in while their coastal radar defense system was down. So we were able to affect that. I was mentioning during the break that one of the things that dawned on me watching the sunset towards Little Cayman and watching the last flight come in and leave Cayman Brac, you realize that that is it until tomorrow morning. What's here stays here. Only to find out shortly after that the week before, last week, a gentleman was airlifted by the police helicopter from Cayman Brac to Grand Cayman. ended up needing some very serious medical attention, but was done in such a time that his recovery was such that he could actually be back in the BRAC by weekend. So those are some of the examples, and then we go back to some of the more practical ones where the infrared system that is available on the helicopter assists the fire department with bushfires, with dump fires, also assists with search and rescue capabilities as well, and to be able to move around much more efficiently than a water-based vessel. So they work in tandem, or sea and air assets in terms of providing that coverage. The Premier alluded to additional technology in the coastal defense system as we go forward, and that can be a range of cameras, coastal radar defense, and also unmanned aircraft, which will be able to supplement the helicopter in terms of being able to stay up for longer periods of time and search in different locations at the same time. So we have sort of a smorgasbord full of options there, but currently we're making very good use of the helicopter in terms of its capability and performance.
Okay, we have a few more callers. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, O.C.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Not bad, and good morning to your guest there. Very good topic this morning, but just want to say I share the same sentiments that the majority of callers this morning has done. Is this going to be another door that is opening to employ foreign people? I don't have any issues whatsoever with hiring foreign people, but you need to look at the situation Cayman is in right now and Caymanian people. I think this should be on top of the list of recruiting Caymanians. Don't use this thing well. You have to be experienced, because at one time in life we were all inexperienced. And thank God that somebody took us under the umbrella and say, you know what, we can train you, and you can probably be one of our best employees one of these days. And I just want to see something like that happen. Like I said, I don't want another door open to bring in foreigners again. No, we have enough people here. And another quick question, has Captain Paul been considered in any way with helping with this project that you all is bringing in place right now? Because the wealth of knowledge that Captain Paul has, there's nobody on this island can touch him when it comes to that. And I think he would be a really good asset, and I'm sure he would volunteer free of charge. So, just those thoughts I had this morning. Thank you very much,
Very
gentlemen.
good
Have a
points.
good day.
Very
Bye.
good points, caller. Thank you very much as well. One of our listeners has written and said Mr. Bruce Smith and Mr. Buck Grizel are qualified, quote unquote, small boat commanders, customs, trained in the UK by the Royal Navy, they believe, as well in that regard. I think Mr. Buck Grizel is now in the private sector, and we know that Mr. Bruce Smith is the acting Chief Immigration Officer as well. Any comments on our caller?
No, just to say to the last caller that I think we were aligned in the fact that we were looking for, even at the commandership of the Coast Guard, for that to go to a Caymanian. And if training has to be done, it will be done while it's on the job with the use of special advisors and additional training there. The idea that the Coast Guard will utilize existing resources and provide an avenue for employment for young persons, even those coming through the Cadet Corps, the Boy Scouts doing their Sea Scouts as well. So we have several avenues in which people can do direct entry into the Coast Guard and then get skilled up within that and to then become proficient at sea. So I think we're aligned around that. That goes all the way down from the Premier's comments.
Okay, Commander Boston.
Yes, I'd like to add on that what the last caller said. Fully agree with the building of skill sets. And again, in the UK, we've done the same thing. We've moved away from employing people who already have loads of skills, and actually bringing in very young people who pick up things very, very quickly, or very clever, very good with technologies, very good in adapting to new situations and so on, and building that capability rather than relying on existing capabilities from the commercial sector or other sectors. So yeah, I'm fully subscribed to that.
Mm-hmm. Soup, yeah, and anything you want to add to that?
No, just to echo what Mr. Commander Bostock is saying. We're looking for young people who add some longevity to the Coast Guard.
And to cover the other point Nicola made, Captain Paul Hurston, I remember him showing me how to use the sextant to navigate, and I think if I did, I'd end up where Dr. McPhee was as well. but more power to him. My GPS works for me, that's about it. But, I am in awe of gentlemen like him who navigated by the stars and the sextant and the other instruments they had in those days and did it with great precision. I thank Nicola for highlighting Captain Paul, and I think we will definitely pay a visit to the Seafarers Association where Captain Paul and some of the other sea captains, chief engineers, and those types would congregate and exchange ideas with them and get some feedback from them as to how best we can go about establishing something that's fit for Cayman.
Mm-hmm. Now, I remember in the 90s, there was a gentleman by the name of McNaughton who was here. That was when government was still over at the Tower building and everything. And he was in charge of the shipping registry, but at the same time, he had some oversight for local vessels. I recall sometimes we had some of the boats that came from Honduras that would bring in provisions from Honduras and passengers sometimes, and likewise take passengers back. And they weren't necessarily fully equipped with life-saving devices and things of that, buoyancy devices and things of that nature. Do we have something in place like that now? Do we need to have it? We see more and more Caymanians, locals, becoming involved in the fishing industry, and these boats are going out to sea for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks. How are they monitored in terms of their safety, and do they need to be monitored in terms of safety? So far, we've been extremely fortunate in terms of no loss of life, but how much more lucky can we be?
I think luck is best when you prepare for it as well. I can say that the overlap between the Maritime Authority, the Port Authority, DOE, and the Police Marine Unit is one that we have some shared responsibility around there. The legislation in terms of boat safety comes from the Port Authority law. The Port Authority themselves don't actually enforce the laws that's enforced by the police on their behalf. So there's some areas there for role clarity and amalgamating laws and adding on around the whole area of equipment. I think our most stringent revolves around commercial operators like those in North Sound in terms of their life vests, safety numbers. Those are things that the police and even the operators themselves tend to police. So if one operator notices another one is severely overloaded, somebody will get alerted to say that shouldn't happen. But again, going from this weekend, so where I was staying in a brack, there was a pretty sizable boat dock, so there was half a dozen boats tied up there, and a range of equipment on them. One of the boats had a commercial life raft in a container on its deck, and I could see from how it was attached that if that's deployed, then a beacon automatically went off as well. So that was one of our local commercial fishing vessels that I would imagine would end up at Pickle Bank and 60 Mile Bank and those things on a regular basis. So how amazing that they've equipped the boat enough to be able to sustain itself that far off until help can arrive. So again, it's about making some of those safety gears and safety equipment mandatory, and then enforcing that. Last time we were on, we spoke a little bit about operating vehicles under the influence of alcohol or other illicit drugs, and that's something that we want to be able to be able to prosecute through legislation as well. But again, not making it overbearing in terms of what persons would need to do, but enough that we have the basic life-saving safety gear on the vessels.
Okay. We have a commercial break coming up, but we're going to take a caller who has rejoined us again. We're going to take that caller before we go to the commercial break. Caller, welcome back to For the Record.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let me commend you guys greatly for bringing this forward, this Coast Guard issue here, or the team, Coast Guard rescue and search and rescue team. This Commander Bostock, this is a question for you, sir. Are you intended to implement a helicopter into this Coast Guard? Hello?
Hello?
Sorry, yeah, go ahead, Carl. You're asking him whether or not he's...
yeah, this was a question for Commander Bostock.
Go ahead. Can you repeat it?
He's from the UK. He's from the UK contingent to put this together, help us put together this Coast Guard unit, correct? Okay. Are your intention is to put a helicopter, implement a helicopter into this unit, into the Coast Guard unit?
Okay, got you.
Will you be implementing a Coast Guard?
Got you, caller. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hold on, don't run yet.
Sorry. Okay.
The reason I'm asking, I know he's aware of all of those helicopters that the UK had over there in the Afghan war, and they're just sitting there rotten. They're rotten, and a lot of them they had to leave in Afghan because they couldn't bring them all back out. I guess they're storing them there for future wars. But it would be good if you could ask the UK, and this goes to you, Chief Secretary, Mr. Howell, if you could get in contact with somebody over in the UK to ask them to donate one of those linked helicopters, because they are the very versatile helicopter that could facilitate and use for a search and rescue unit. That's all I have to ask and say for today, and I'll listen on. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, caller. We're going to take a commercial break now. When we return, Commander Bostock, we'll give you an opportunity to respond to that caller. Please stay tuned. For the Record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're on the last leg of the show this morning. We have in the studio with us Chief Officer Mr. Wesley Howell, Commander Philip Bostock, and Superintendent Mr. Brad Ebanks. We have one caller, but we're going to give Commander Bostock an opportunity to respond to our last caller's comments and questions before we go to the next caller.
Thank you very much. Thank you, caller. To be quite frank with the last question, currently there's no plan to integrate helicopters into a Coast Guard here. There's multiple reasons for that, but as the Chief Officer already said, at the moment there's a very good partnership with the helicopter and the very good use of the helicopter at the moment that provides excellent capabilities, like night vision capabilities, to assist search and rescue, and has done so very successfully in the past. To the other point, Coast Guard, the UK Coast Guard has a lot of helicopters, 22 in total actually for the UK, which sounds a lot, but actually the Coast Guard helicopters there are a national resource. They're not a Coast Guard resource, so they respond to all kinds of accidents and incidents, including mountain rescue and crashes on motorways and so on. And also they're a very costly resource, so the Coast Guard pays the lion's share of its budget for just running the helicopters. So that's something to consider, and especially if you run different types of helicopters, you need different crews and different training, different maintenance protocols and so on. So it's a very expensive gadget to have. I think the way ahead is much more looking at how we can supplement capabilities, and we mentioned before other things like drones, for example, that can be utilized, radar and so on, to make the best use of the resource and the finance behind them to achieve most, rather than just buying assets.
And the suitability of military helicopters for search and rescue missions, civilian activities, is there any comparison?
The helicopters the Navy use, for example, are very good helicopters for their purpose. They're multi-role helicopters, so they would have to be especially adapted to search and rescue civilian uses. Also, there would be issues of maintenance packages and continued maintenance and so on when the military contracts run out. So it's a very complex issue, helicopters.
Okay, we have one caller, and I think we're going to make this the last caller for the morning, because I want to give you gentlemen an opportunity to summarize and to pass out any additional information that you may have as well. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Mr. O.C., is my call?
Yes, sir. Go right ahead. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Mr. O.C., I'm very interested in the marine operation there, because I tell you what,
the people out there running those boats don't know the rules of the road. And we got rules there, seem to go on the highway here.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing I would like to see is they do a training before they're allowed to go on the water. On top of that, it should be a charge for the boats. Seem to be paid taxes on cars. Now, this should be implemented in there if you want to. And then another thing, too, they must learn, as I said, the rules of the road, plus the navigation, and the territory. They come here, want to be boatmen, and take people out on to fishing and diving. I know instances where, I didn't personally, where people come here, one boat, carry people out there to snorkel, come back in, pick up the next one, and then that's how it was operated. This slackness of being here in Cayman got to stop, sir. We got to have a process which is beneficial to all concerned, and I advocate this. When I was president of the Seafarers Association, I had a room already set up there, and I had a captain, Murphy Powell's brother-in-law, who would teach navigation. I had about 4 people who was interested in it, and they would pay him a small fee for it. And that thing could still be established, that we get somebody like he's doing the port captain job there now with docking the boats.
Captain Scott, is that?
No. He's Honduran, married to Murphy. Been here 100 years now.
Oh, yeah. I know the person, yes.
Yeah. And he was willing to come there and teach the people how to handle the boats, what is thing like that. I bet you ask any of them right now who has the right of way on the water, whether a sailboat or a motorboat, and they would not be able to tell you on which side they're supposed to pass on at all times. That's the rules of the road that you got to know which side to cross the boat at all times. So these are lessons here, especially how busy our water is getting with people out there, and come here with boats that they never see a boat before, and this is what I'm asking. There's some attention be put to that.
Good point, caller. Thank you very much for that. Superintendent Ebanks, any comments in that regard? No one wants to be regulated, but yet they want government's assistance.
Right. Very, very important point that the caller is making. We see where this is very needed. And I think it may have been brought up by Mr. Ezra Miller some time ago. The need for proper training and some kind of qualification as a boat operator. Right now, we only have an age requirement from the Port Authority. But if you don't have, the qualifications to operate a vessel, it's not required, and that poses a realistic, danger to the boating public. Luckily, we do have a good boating industry. A lot of the North Sound operators, they go through the boat owners go through a proper experience process with their staff and make sure that they're capable of operating the commercial vessels. But it's more the pleasure vessels that we're more concerned about. We have 17, 18-year-old kids that are actually operating vessels. That's not to say that they all can't do it, but there should be some process that, if you're going to get behind the wheel of a vessel,
especially if you're going to have other occupants of that vessel.
Yes, you should be qualified to do that. So he does make a very important statement there.
Okay, an opportunity for closing comments, and we'll start with you, Superintendent, and go around the table.
I just want to say thank you again, OC, for allowing us the time on your show. This, I would say, probably is the most serious that we've been about Coast Guard. There's always been feasibility studies, and there's always been talks about the need for a Coast Guard. But, this is the most serious that we've ever been about it. I would say that we're getting things going. So it's going to take a little time, but we're moving as fast as we can with the help of Mr. Bostock here. and the government officials. So it's going to come. There's going to be some teething stages, but we're going to get there. So we just want the public to give us their support, give us their ideas, so we can reach the school.
Mm-hmm. And based on what we're hearing in terms of calls, people are really excited about it and looking forward to it. Commander Bostock.
Yes, very, very well summarized. I'd like to thank your callers and yourself for giving the platform and raising a lot of valid points. I must say that everyone I've spoken to over the last couple of weeks, I've been very interested and also very helpful, which is very nice. There's a lot of support in the community, and I hope I'll have the chance to speak to many of your listeners and many members of the community here to get their inputs and get their views and draw from their resource and maybe rope them in to actually contribute in some way or form to a more safer environment out there. What I always like to do in things like that is to use the opportunity also to raise a bit of a safety message. So if you're going out boating, please make sure you're safe, you check the weather forecast, you have the right equipment, and if you're in doubt, contact the Marine unit or other people who might be able to give you advice. So please stay out safe there so you don't need the assistance in the first place. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Mr. Howell.
And for me to wrap up, again, it's my pleasure to be working with the team on the border security aspects and particularly on the search and rescue as we go forward with the National Coast Guard. Just want to remind the public that we are starting, with these series of radio shows, our public involvement and growing into public consultation. So this is the time that we're asking for feedback to help steer us down the right path. We're looking for a solution that is fit for Cayman, not somebody else's solution. And Commander Bostock is committed to making that happen along with our other stakeholders. I just want to say thanks for having us on the show, and thank you to the callers for their questions, comments, and suggestions, all very helpful.
Yeah, I want to thank you for making yourselves available, and it is this type of discussion and discourse that we have that will certainly make the Cayman Islands a much safer place, a much more enjoyable place as well. And I just want to say to those fishermen out there on the waterfront, in suggesting that we ensure that you have the right safety equipment on your vessels is not intended, to control you, but to ensure that you're safe so that you don't have to make that call, that distress call to say that we have an issue, that we have a problem, if we ensure that your boats are properly equipped. Yes, things can happen that are outside of your control, but those things that are within your control, please ensure that you think and you ensure the safety of the crew that you put on those vessels as well. Folks, I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters' keepers. There is always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want or even those who crave. I say to you, have a great day. Continue to support your radio station, Radio Cayman. Join Sterling, Dwayne Ebanks at 12 noon for Talk Today. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these three beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.